Okay, we're about to get started here. My name is Eugene Hernandez from Film at Lincoln Center, and welcome to this conversation about the new documentary that hopefully you've had a chance to see in the virtual cinema. In a different era, we'd be gathering all these folks together with us on stage to talk about a movie that you've just watched in our theater. In this case, we're doing things a little differently, so you might have just watched the movie. If not, you might be taking an opportunity to see it soon. So welcome to the Film at Lincoln Center audience, those who are watching us live right now on YouTube, those who are listening to this podcast, this Film at Lincoln Center podcast, and those who might be joining us for the very first time, welcome. We're in sort of alternative programming mode, and we're trying to provide as many different opportunities for our audience to engage with new movies that are in the world right now. And again, this is a movie that John Lewis' Good Trouble is a movie that we would have loved to have in a physical theater and to have our three guests sitting with us on stage. But this hopefully will suffice as an alternative until we can gather in person. So I want to welcome three folks who are involved with, intimately involved with the making and creation of this excellent new documentary. First, please welcome filmmaker Dawn Porter. Hi, Dawn. Producer Erika Alexander.
Hello, Eugene.
How are you?
Living the dream.
And yes, and please join me in welcoming Tamar-kali, composer of the film. So just to get things started and just to kind of ease into it, where's everybody logging on from? I'm here in New York in Hell's Kitchen. Where's everybody else logging in from?
I am in Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts.
Very nice.
And I'm in
in St. Helena. And I'm in St. Helena Island, South Carolina.
Very good. So we're spread out a little bit. I'm glad we can spend a little time together talking about this movie. I want to talk not only about how it got started, and we'll get to that in a minute, but we'll talk about John Lewis. We'll talk about the many different topics and themes and ideas that are explored in the film. Somehow it's appropriate that there's a clap of thunder behind me. I don't know if you can hear it as I'm talking. So it's a stormy afternoon. And I also want to give our audience a chance to ask questions. So if you do have questions, save them up, start thinking about them, and maybe in about 20, 25 minutes or so, we'll start taking some questions from our audience. Dawn, it's sort of an easy question as an easy way into this discussion. Can you share with us how the project started? Where did it begin for you? And maybe what motivated you when you first heard about it? Maybe the first call, the first, where did it begin?
Actually, it began in New York City at the Tribeca Film Festival, the other film festival in New York.
Yeah, our friends in Tribeca, very cool.
As at Tribeca, we were at a reception the executives at CNN. A lot happens at those meetings. And Amy and Tellis from CNN said, we were thinking, would you like to do John Lewis? And I was like, yes. So, I had just finished the 4-part series about Bobby Kennedy for President for Netflix. And they were touring with RBG. So, I like to say they were looking for another 80-year-old to continue the tradition. But, for me, I was really in that headspace, having just been doing a really deep dive into the archive for Bobby Kennedy. Mm-hmm. And, also in Bobby Kennedy's series, John Lewis tells the story that he had volunteered for Bobby Kennedy's campaign and had organized the rally in Indianapolis for the Black community. And as they were going out to that rally, they learned that Dr. King had been murdered. And Bobby Kennedy, you can hear him say, do they know? He's on his way to the rally. And people are like, no, they don't know. So Bobby Kennedy realizes that he's going to have to, if he goes to speak to this audience, he is going to be the first person to tell this Black audience in 1968 that Dr. King had died. So some of his other aides, his white aides, were saying, you can't go, it's going to be too dangerous, there's going to be, rioting, familiar words. And a very young John Lewis said, you have to go, you have to talk to people. And Bobby Kennedy did that. He listened to his youngest aide, and it's well considered one of Bobby Kennedy's best speeches. It's the first time he spoke about his own brother's murder, and it's a city that did not have all of the unrest and demonstrating that night. So I love that story because it shows, even at such a young age, in his 20s, what a great political insight John Lewis had. So when the opportunity came to make a film about him, it's kind of dreamy for a filmmaker, because I'd spent the last few years thinking about civil rights and about government from the perspective of somebody at the top of the food chain, right? Somebody with all the privilege in the world. And then to go and spin it, to think of it from a Black man whose parents were sharecroppers, to think of his view of it, it was just a great opportunity for me. So I really, was interested in doing it. And plus, who wouldn't want to spend time with, John Lewis? So.
Well, so building on that answer, thank you for sharing that context. And this might connect with Erika in just a moment, but just to give sort of our audience today a better idea of how a project comes together. In this case, so you're at this event. Is this what was like Tribeca Film Festival like 2 years ago, I'm guessing, or let's see, what year is this?
2017.
2017. Okay, so 3 years ago. I'm sure there are any number of executives that walk up to you or could walk up to you at a party or at a conversation. And Amy Entelis is a big deal at CNN, and if she wants to make this happen, you certainly would take it seriously. But it's also a question about sort of the path for any documentary filmmaker, the path between someone coming up to you at a party or an event at a film festival and saying they want to make a movie with you about someone. I'm sure that happens enough that it doesn't always lead to a finished movie. In this case, the interest was real, the conversation was real. Of course, you're going to say yes in the moment, but so just to give the audience a little bit of context of how a movie like this gets built, there's a number of really big companies behind this movie, and there's a number of forces that have come together.
Yes.
What happens next?
Yeah.
Someone whispers in your ear and says, "Hey, we think we should talk to you about this." But then what happens?
Yeah. So that was that germ of an idea. The great thing is that usually you go to a network and you're pitching them to get them interested. And here they were already interested. So what it began as the conversation of what would be my take on a John Lewis story, particularly because he's a person who has 60 plus years of career. There are an infinite number of movies that you can make about the congressman. And so they wanted to hear more. So Laura Michael Chissen, who is our other producer, and we had just done Bobby Kennedy for President series. So, I asked her to join, and, we started kind of doing a development process. And I knew pretty quickly that I knew what I already knew about the congressman, and I knew what I wanted to add to just what I knew, So I knew him as a very public figure. I knew, I could think of him on that bridge. I knew about him in the Freedom Rides. I actually didn't remember that he spoke at the March on Washington. So I knew about those things, but I really also wanted to give some context. We only see those, 30 seconds of that moment on the bridge. And I wanted to back it up and say, how did we get here? How did he get to the point where he and those other brave young people are marching quietly and bravely towards violence? They're walking into it. Most of us avoid violence. And I was wondering, how did they get there? And so that is what led to backing up and explaining that John Lewis had studied nonviolence. he and the other civil rights workers had trained for those moments. And I think that that's really important to emphasize, that they did not just appear that day and march. They were so intentional. And I do think that that is a really important lesson for all of us who are looking to push our country to be the place we want to live in. Mm-hmm. That amount of strategy and intelligence that those young people brought to their work, I feel like that, as much as anything, is what led to their being so successful. So I knew I wanted to back him up. And then the other thing is I wanted to know what he was doing now. It's like, where do old civil rights workers go? There's so many people who we owe our, freedom to and our liberty to, but we don't quite know what they're doing now. And he's a person who has had such an interesting career evolution to go from the outside activist to being the person in the halls of power. I just thought that was a really interesting journey. So I wanted to make sure we firmly placed him in the present, that we didn't just keep him in the history books, but that we brought him into today. So those were that was kind of the sketch that I laid out for CNN. And then I started working with archivists, and I read his books and started just watching and looking at everything I could.
So I'm glad you mentioned the present, and we're going to get to the present in a minute, because I think that the movie speaks to so much about what is going on. Even in looking back, it's looking at today and it's looking forward. But I want to include in this conversation also some of our other friends who are joining us. Erika, tell me about the first phone call or email that you got about this, and tell me about kind of a similar question to Dawn, but sort of what resonated, what struck you about being a part of this.
Okay. Well, when people walk up to me at parties, they don't want to, whisper in my ear, would I like to do something? They want to know what the concession stand is. And aren't you that girl from, but then, no, I mean, I really appreciate that Dawn is a very powerful storyteller. And she had already been, as she mentioned, creating a space around the John Lewis story with Bobby Kennedy and everything she had done before. I campaign for candidates, and often inside of their candidacies meet other people. So I campaigned with Congressman John Lewis, with Stacey Abrams and Ayanna Pressley in 2016. This is before they were national figures like they were, at least the two, Stacey and Ayanna. And I got a chance to spend a lot of time around him, but also he has a constituent services rep whose name is Rachel O'Neill, and she's my conduit to the congressperson. I was brought into this talking about a project around the congressman, and then of course you obviously want to need to partner with a storyteller and a filmmaker who can do something like that. And someone had mentioned Dawn Porter, and I had already seen Bobby Kennedy for president and knew she was like a killer filmmaker. So we were just fishing around. She took our calls, and I have a production company with Color Farm Media, me and Ben, and we told her about what we were trying to do and why. And she said, well, I'm actually making a documentary about John Lewis. And then we decided then to ask if she would be interested in partnering, and she was. And boom shakalaka, here I am today. So that really, for me, is how I kind of got into that. But it would have not been possible without her having already been in the space and creating and doing her thing. So that was really fascinating, because that's kind of like a kismet thing, like a bam, like a lightning thing. And I really appreciate that, because we talk about, especially as Black people, how we need to collaborate and partner up more. And people don't think that happens, but it does. In this case, it did very much.
So yeah, sometimes it's worth emphasizing what you were just talking about, Erika. Sometimes, and it's no surprise with someone of the stature of John Lewis, I mean, sometimes there are multiple tracks of exploration and potential storytelling that might be that might be surrounding an individual. And there's many different ways that a story about, and maybe there's plenty of other stories that will be told about the congressperson, but in some cases those paths don't ever cross, and maybe 2 or 3 or 4 different documentaries could have been made. In this case, you decided to join forces to dig deeper. How does a relationship like that blossom? Because you've been thinking about the film from your perspective, Erika. Maybe you and your collaborators are looking at it from a different one, and then you get in a room and sort of say, okay, let's see if we can find a shared path here.
I mean, it's a real kind of testament to Erika and Ben that they came in and they got along really well with Laura, who was, already producing. We understood immediately what they brought. They had been working with the congressman's team. They kind of had that understanding of how his office worked. So that was really invaluable. But I just really liked, I personally feel like a person like John Lewis can never have too many films. I mean, like and I think sometimes people are a little too precious about, and we know why, that, resources are scarce, but I really felt like I wanted to collaborate with Erika and Ben. I just admire her. I admire what she does politically. She had a fluency with the political, actors that I was not so current on. Once upon a time, I lived in DC, but I haven't lived in DC for, 15 years. So, and I think as a creator, Erika is also writes and directs. And I was really excited about that kind of creative input. So it just worked out. A lot of it's personality. I mean, you have to have a mutual respect for each other. You have to be clear about, what's my lane? What's your lane? Erika has like no ego, which is hilarious because, she's an actress and you would think like she's famous for being Maxine Shaw and Living Single. And in fact, she answers to Maxine. Like if you said, Max, she will turn around. I've seen it a million times. We were filming in Capitol Hill, a Capitol Hill police officer. They are not nice, and he says, ma'am. And I'm like, oh boy, we're gonna get in trouble. I think I was carrying a camera or something. And he was like, can you take my picture? And he handed me his phone because he wanted a selfie with Erika. The same with the guards going into the house. So, it's a good thing I wasn't selfish and stupid because I wouldn't have had the benefit of having Erika around. And Erika, people love her. They all want it. Like it's never been so easy to get camera equipment through the house security system. They were like, come on, Max. I was like, are you kidding me? You give me such a hard time, so, but you know what, our jobs are hard. And, anything of this sort, which is, there's a lot of, pressure. You don't want to get it wrong. You don't want to be the person who messed up John Lewis's movie. So, if you have people who are like willing to kind of get in there and work really hard, which they were, and Erika and Ben brought so much to our team that, we just blended really well. I will say that's not always the case. I mean, right. I think it's a lot more usual that the competing projects, may the best girl win kind of situation. So I really feel like this film is so much better because we collaborated, which was my hope at the beginning.
And to be clear, I just have to say, I mean, she's very generous. I got out of her way. This woman knows what she's doing, knows what she wants. She's an amazing
That's
team.
why I liked her. I was like, come on, as long as you don't talk.
I was there for the craft service. I'm not going to lie.
And makeup.
And makeup. There you go. There you go. Have a little fun. And that's exactly what I did. And I really appreciate it because actually we're a young company, Color Farm, and we had not seen a documentary work at that level. And Laura Michael Chisholm is amazing at what she does, and Summer Damon and Keith, he was the DP. It was like watching, the best play and do what they're doing. They just happen to be of color and women and focused around powerful issues. something wanted me to be in that space and learn from her, and it couldn't be more generous and fun to do.
Well, Erika, your answer leads into actually really well into my next question, which is for Tamar. And Tamar, it takes a village of really talented artists to collaborate to make a film that achieves at such a high level as this one does. So I'm really just curious to hear from you what was the spark for you, whether it was an individual in this team or to what extent the life and story of John Lewis spoke to you. I'm curious what was the light bulb for you that sparked your own passion for this or interest in this?
So I've been very clear in communicating around this project that this is the first time where I said yes to a project before even meeting the director. That is quite unconventional. It's not standard. In most cases, it's really not a good idea. It's just that my heart just leapt at the opportunity. Do you know what I mean? Like it was unbelievable. I mean, I haven't been doing this that long. I'm pretty new in this film world. And I didn't see a future where I was not involved in this project. And thankfully, you know, it was a project in the wonderful deft hands of Dawn. Of course, I looked her up and I was like, oh, another New York girl, you know, that's always great. I have a thing about other New Yorkers, and, you know, we're just like that. But it was the subject matter that really did it for me. It was such an opportunity and I couldn't imagine not being a part of it. And it turns out that I was really able to pour my heart into this project in a way because of the specificity of who the film was about and his direct impact on my life and well-being as a citizen of the United States, that it was just such an honor.
I want to actually, and this question can go to any of the three of you. There's so much to, as I said earlier, there's so much, at least in my viewing of the film, there's so much that this film says, not only about this great man and all that he's achieved and the lives that he's connected with and touched and impacted. And that's so many of us in, you know, and certainly in this country. But I don't think anyone could imagine when you're making this film, the moment in which it would be released and unveiled to an audience, and in the way that it's available to an audience now, even though movie theater is not available, it actually is more widely available through this kind of virtual approach that everyone is taking to get the film out there. It speaks to a moment. It speaks to not only what's happening in our country now, but it also speaks to what somehow will happen over the next few months as we head into the fall. So I guess that the question very generally as a starting point to either, any of you who want to jump in on the conversation, and we can just kind of talk about this. Just the question of you couldn't have predicted or imagined when you're making these creative choices that all of you are making with this film, how those creative choices would be so relevant at this moment. So you must look at the film differently now than in the moment that you were making it, from each of your perspectives.
Well, I would say that based on what I know of Dawn's track record and the types of films that she has done, they've all been timely.
No, that's true.
Just in terms of the subject matter and providing an opportunity for us as citizens to be more familiar with our democracy, the legal and justice system. So, I mean, of course, there's this moment that we're in that no one could have imagined 4 years ago. But at the same time, I believe that Dawn has this history of doing this work that speaks to the moment, because it is the very foundation of what, you know, we're hoping to achieve, or whatever our ideals are as a nation. So I just wanted to say that.
That's very kind. Which is why I love these women. You know what I want to point out is look at this screen, right? Look at all of us, and I'm including you, Eugene, in that as head of Film at Lincoln Center, which is a very prestigious post. And so certainly in the last several years, I, like many other people, have been really worried, disgusted, despondent about the state of our body politic. And yet, here we all are in our power. I mean, Laura found Tamar-kali and was like, this is the woman who should write this music. And then, you don't know this, but then we were like, she's never gonna do it. So, but she did, you know, and so I asked her to write a modern spiritual. I said, like, that's what John Lewis, that it's this theme of looking back and looking to the future. And so when people say nothing has changed, you know, I think this screen is the answer to that. Certainly, you know, each of us individually and collectively are changing things. That doesn't mean you stop. It means you push forward, you look back, you bring with. So, you know, I certainly was happy with what the film was. When we started, I knew what I wanted to do, which was explore his life and his relevance for this moment. And I do see the film differently. I hear it differently. So many things have happened besides our world events. The congressman was, you know, diagnosed with cancer. Elijah Cummings has passed on. So, you know, when you think of, I think I would say this to the filmmakers in the audience: make the timeless film that you want to make. And fight really hard to stay true to your vision, because you may not get another chance to explore those questions. There may not be a next time. So, but I do know that it is striking people in a very deep way. You know, when we started, I was like, oh, we're going to have to make people care about protest. Well, we don't have to do that, right? The world has done that for us. So I'm really happy that this is part of that conversation in more of a healing way than I had envisioned, I think.
And these issues are evergreen, and democracy is a moving target. And the people who fight and work in this space are exhausted by it. I can't imagine being a Dawn Porter in a world without a Dawn Porter or Eugene or a Tamar to do this work. And certainly I know that I intentionally try to stay in this space, because I feel like this is what makes life worth living and gives everybody the freedom to do the other work they want to do. And it's not unconnected, but everyone was like, wow, this is so timely. You're right. But these things are evergreen because we're still working on it, and we're a young nation. And they've made so many mistakes in how they thought about connecting justice and social justice. And so the fact that we are willing to keep working on it, and oh Lord, I'm thinking about this pandemic has been so horribly demoralizing to people. And they are starting to think about those structures and the connections that's held this facade up for so long. The facade has been crumbling for a long time. We're just trying to tear it down and expose it, but this is what gets at it. And that's why I love stories. I love story. The way that it can connect, and people say, wow, how did they know? She didn't know. She just knew that what she was going to do anyway. She was going to do it anyway. And then the universe, I'm so about energy. Then the universe connects. And I think next thing you know, it's like killing. She's Roberta Flack, Killing Me Softly. She's killing us softly with her song. Lord have mercy. It's real.
It's
So,
our
yeah.
song.
It's interesting in watching the film, and certainly as someone who I would consider myself having been aware of the congressman for a long time, but I feel like my vantage point on him has always been, in his 60s, 70s, 80s, as I sort of engaged him through his work in the moment. And then maybe seeing a still photo of him, on the bridge, or sort of knowing that he was part of something big, but not. I've never had that sort of full story illuminated for me. As I'm watching this film, I redefined who the congressman is, because I started thinking about him as a 20-something, and what he was responding to, and he speaks to this so eloquently. But what I then, to make the leap back to this film today, I'm moved by how his actions as a young man are impacting, affecting, inspiring many of the younger politicians that you and activists who you follow, and AOC keeps coming to mind, but so many other younger folks, because that whatever's going to happen, whatever this is all going to end, wherever this is all going to end up, it's going to be in the hands of a next generation. I'm not trying to sound too old here. I'm only in my 50s, but it really is. It's going to be carried by people who are, in my view, it's going to be carried by people who are the age that John Lewis was when he was called.
I think he has a real and people forget this, but you got it. You got the the message of the movie. But he was the AOC. He was the kind of the force pushing the outside. The NAACP and NAACP Legal Defense Fund were saying, this is slow down, this is too fast, this is not the way, it's dangerous. Your perspective changes over the years. And at 19, 20, 23, people keep saying to me, but why did he do this? I'm like, he hated segregation. He hated discrimination. And he just, he wasn't trying to start building a movement. He was just trying to do what he could. And so when he says, like, I was just trying to help out, like, he's not kidding. He's not minimizing. Yeah. I think along the way, he discovered that he had a talent for this work. And so he just kept accepting the next challenge. He kept doing what needed to be done. So, seeing that is really interesting. But then it's so interesting to me, like when he speaks to the kind of young firebrands in Congress, they will listen to him differently because he's been where they are. And he is not trying to minimize their power. He's trying to help them wield it the most effectively, and so I think it's no accident that they have the respect, and also he respects them. I mean, it does make a difference when your elders respect what you bring and encourage it, rather than try and just keep their space. He's very much about making space for whomever wants to do the work. He is not a person who needs to put himself at the center of things. That's not what interests him.
I'm looking at the clock. We have a question that's come in, and I want to use this moment before I read it to invite anyone else who's listening and watching this conversation to share a question with us, and we'll get to as many as we can in the next 10, 15 minutes or so. This is okay. So this is a question for Dawn, not about documentary work and not actually about this particular film explicitly, but maybe the answer will bring us back to it. Dawn, as a documentary filmmaker, are you inspired by, do you look to narrative filmmaking, And if so, which films specifically?
I mean, we call narrative filmmaking the F word, fiction.
Yeah. Correct.
Because, but no, I think what in particular, I love seeing how fiction directors stage and light and shoot things. And I think, you know, in documentary work, our tools are getting better. And that's because we have bigger budgets. So we can afford great DPs with nicer cameras, and we can do, you know, cool graphics and kind of be inspired by our fiction sistren and brethren. Yeah, particularly I think like color palettes. You know, like when I look at things like Watchmen, that's really interesting. Queen Sugar, it's gorgeously filmed, you know. You know, I like kind of those like lyrical, you know, kind of those, I don't like quick cutting, you know, that's not my thing. I'm kind of a sink into it person. So
I appreciate the point about narrative, because it, you know, this film, for me and so many nonfiction films I see, if they're strong and if they're good and if they're well made, they envelop you in a world that you kind of forget whether it's fiction or nonfiction. You're in the story. You're in with the characters. For this particular film, where there, as you're conceiving, you talked about a little bit about the palette and other things. As you're entering the early stages of making a film, are you giving, what kind of reference points are you giving to Tamar on the composition side, or to a DP, or to anyone else you're collaborating with? How do you sort of?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that was, that I think this is right. I think one thing, one of the first things we showed Tamar-kali was some of the archive from the field hands. And then immediately she was like, oh, field holler. I don't know what a field holler is. I mean, I do now, but I didn't then. And, you know, she just said it like everybody knows what a field holler is. So I really wanted to have this connection to land. Land is really important to the congressman and his family, but it's also important to Black people, because for so many of us, we don't have the privilege of owning land. Land is the way that you amass wealth in this country. And for so many of us, that was not the case. And so it is not an accident that the congressman, one of the stories he comes back to is the fact that his family still owns 100 acres of land in Troy, Alabama. And I think that that was a way of grounding himself. John Lewis knows where he comes from. He's not out there. A lot of characters, they're out there searching. He knows where he comes from. And he knows, you know, that he can always return there. He went home is really home for him. So that was very important to communicate to Tamar-kali, that we have to be grounded in this music. So it has to reach back, but also look forward. And then, you know, as far as the filming, I worked with Keith Walker, who I've worked with a lot, and Tony Hardman, two spectacular DPs. And both of them have the ability to kind of melt away, but they also, they're both African-American gentlemen, and they both have a real reverence for the subject matter, which I think reflects what Tamar-kali is saying. And you know, I think one of your jobs as a director is to bring your team together and then let them explore what speaks to them. So, you know, kind of, I think Keith and Tony filmed the congressman with love, you know, like it's like you would treat an elder. You see the richness of his skin tones, you know, you see him, some of the things they shot, I mean, the like really small details, his aide and another person holding his back as they're walking, like those are symbols of love. And you don't always see love between Black people and Black men in particular that way. The easy relationship he has with his staff, that's what humanizes a John Lewis and shows you we revere him from afar, but the people close to him, they have that love too. And that's important to know. How does he get all this done? Because he has all these people who can see a bigger cause, right? You can see their job is not just like, they're patting his face and putting makeup on to make sure, and then he makes a joke. I mean, but you see, that's the real behind the scenes. Like, nobody does any of big work alone, right? We all need this whole machine together.
So these are two great tracks, Dawn. So I want to follow up on both of them. I'm going to start with Tamar-kali about the music side to go a little bit deeper. Could you already hear? Tell us about your creative process. Could you already hear where you wanted to go, or how did you explore? How did you find the direction that you wanted to bring to this from a composition point of view?
I'm very much so an artist that requires the work to wash over me and to sit with it. But in terms of the initial concept and idea, or the emotional and spiritual aesthetic that Dawn was going for, it just happens that I am someone of Gullah Geechee heritage who has a similar story to Congressman Lewis. I'm sitting here on the land that my family has occupied for centuries. And in having that shared, Afro-Indigenous background with Congressman Lewis being descended from people who were enslaved and worked the land. My mother came up to New York at the end of the Great Migration. So I was one of those kids, a New Yorker kid, who every summer went down south, where I saw people who looked like me, who were my family, that owned their land, their homes, were educators, doctors, and I mean, having that rich heritage and a connection to land. My grandfather was a subsistence farmer. My aunt still farms. I knew what she was talking about. I didn't have to imagine. And it just so happened that that's how it worked out. So it was really a pleasure in that regard to be able to kind of pour that ethnocultural aspect of the musical traditions that I've grown up with. Because we all have those ethnocultural musical traditions, and I was able to lean into that experience and lean into that heritage, in addition to the other, orchestrations that I did. When I think about the music, there's a certain juxtaposition, because there's this pastoral element, right, that ties him to the land. And, he's such a sweet soul, like the way he talks about the chickens all the time. And when he goes back home and when he's like, oh, the cow and the horse are good friends. Like he's definitely a country boy. And then, but he had these big dreams. He was a dreamer, and, he had a lot of intellectual interests. And so there's this grand reference that needed to be there. And so when I was using, I used some French horns, I used a wind section. There's just so much to his character and personality, and that range needed to be present in the score, And one thing that was really wonderful as well is that it's reflected in how Dawn handles the revealing of this complex human being. So from having this very pastoral background to having these, political dreams in terms of, the founders and their ideas, philosophy, and then being an art collector. So he has this range of interests and a way that he is as a human being that's very vast. And I wanted that to be reflected in the score as well.
Thank you. Erika, I want to pick up on the other half of what Dawn was talking about in her answer, and that is, of course, the reverence that we feel in watching the film, and that Dawn was referring to in thinking about the way it's shot. But you're also, and I'm starting with you, Erika, on this question, but anybody can pick it up. But I think that you have a grounding that you were talking about earlier in DC, and having connections and relationships, and and a foundation. Tell us about how you build at that kind of bond between a director and a subject that has to work for a story like this to be revealed. Because I would imagine, not being from DC, not knowing that world, but if it's anything like the entertainment business or other industries, it can be hard to get behind the curtain sometimes. And this movie does that so well. It takes us inside maybe places that we wouldn't normally go, but there's certainly there's got to be some challenges in sort of easing through those and access points, so to speak.
Most definitely. I mean, I'm usually behind the camera and Dawn would be directing me. And I know what works with the actor is that you need to trust them. You have to have no space between you and the director, because you're counting on them to tell you the truth. You're also counting on them to see that perhaps their version of the truth may be different from yours, and that you're coming to an understanding of understanding each other. And so I think that must be the same in a documentary, that you have to stand away and lay in the cut and allow Dawn to have the freedom she needs to communicate with not only her team, but the person in front of it. Because the first thing they want to know is, will you hurt me? Mm. And they may not say it, but that's what they want to know. They want to know if they look good on camera. She always took time to turn back the monitor and say, look at that. And I put them at ease, because they get to see what type of light they're being in, the type of space around them. They get to see what she sees, and it puts them at ease. And then they start to have a conversation, and it's a natural thing, because Dawn is a very great conversationalist, because she listens, and she's already done her homework on it. She came there prepared, but she's dropped it all, and she's having a conversation. She has the intention of the question, and yet behind that intention is a great understanding to listen and hear what the person's saying, and fall into that space that only happens on a set, where you get into that energy, and then you're having the conversation you're having the scene in your head becomes very real. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I love that. And I think that, what Tamar was talking about, her connection to the land, which is so beautiful, because I don't know if people can see, my girl is sitting under a big old sycamore tree or something. Like it ain't no thing. And it just makes me smile, because she just, she's living a whole nother life. And I'm trying to get on that, because both my parents were orphans. I am very disconnected from anything that's essentially grounded. And I tell everybody, I lived the first 11 years of my life in a hotel called Starlight off of Route 66 in Flagstaff, Arizona. And I spent my whole life looking for home, trying to either purchase a home for my mother or find a home. But what it has given me is a sense of creating bonding and with others immediately. Like, I want to have people trust me immediately, and show them I'm not out to hurt them, and that I'm there to hopefully listen. So I believe that has sustained me. And in DC, the currency is loyalty. Mm. That's the currency. There's a lot of things that could happen, good, bad, or ugly, but how you treat people when they're down and up matters. When you show up for people, when you have nothing, or when they suddenly have something, matters. And I try to show up in that space in my life and say, it doesn't matter. There's no hierarchy. I'm here to try to help and show that my palms are open, and, and I come in peace. But it doesn't mean that I didn't come to tell the truth. And the truth is something else. And they're willing to tell you the truth, sometimes at their own detriment, because you've been loyal.
What Erika's saying is really important, because the trust that people had for her transferred to me. Mm. So, we could really, I still had to earn it, but I came with, a very good introduction. So I think also, interviewing is a lot about control, right? And if you kind of don't try and force people where they don't want to go, and they realize you are going to let them really explain to you. I mean, so even like how we did the interview, the master interview with the congressman, part of that was he's been interviewed so many times. I needed to kind of get him off book a little bit. So we created these short films. We rented a theater stage, put him in the center, turned down the lights, and let him tell the story of that day. And then it became so clear that it had to be like full face to camera, because John Lewis should tell his own story. He should require you to look him in the eye and hear him, hear each word and which words he emphasizes. And that's how you will know who he is. You just have to listen. You have to listen to him.
At what stage in the filmmaking process was that interview? Was that early in your interaction with him? Because you spent a lot of time on the road and traveling and everything, but where did that fit?
That was pretty late. Like, I actually really like to do the kind of master interview as late as possible, because then you can cover what you need to cover. Unfortunately, sometimes you do that and then there's a pandemic and then you're SOL.
Right.
So, I wouldn't recommend it all the time. I think probably what I'll do going forward is I'll do two, but with a person like Mr. Lewis, you kind of get, as far as like a formal sit down with a whole shebang, like that's going to be a one-time thing. So I needed to do it as late as possible to make sure I asked him everything we needed to get.
And when was that filmed, that interview?
That was in the spring. I think that was like May or June, something like that. Just before Congress.
How much time?
That.
Right.
We had a whole day pretty much. I mean, he came like late morning, and then we filmed for most of into the late afternoon. And then we went to a Mexican restaurant for dinner, and he came and he greeted we had a big crew that day, and he greeted every single person, and he had like his Mexican food, and he just had a ball. He just had a great time. He really likes people. So,
remember, Dawn, he had been up all day, and it was by the time we got there, and no one thought he was, and there he was. He just, it was great.
And then I made him sit on a stool all day. So he's really a good sport too. I mean,
I know we've gone over time. I'm going to do one last question, because I think it's a good way to conclude the interview, or this conversation, I should say. And it's a question from Soleil Nathwani. How did you balance this for Dawn? How did you balance making decisions around telling the story of the congressman and the time, telling the story of the personal and the cultural historical?
I think he's very much a product of the cultural historical.
Yeah.
So it was like, required that you understand the cultural historical in order to understand who he is. But at the same time, as I was reading his memoirs and, watching things that have been produced about him, I didn't know that he loved art. I didn't know that, the one thing we didn't get to do is he loves to go antiquing. So, I had dreams of like following him into it, because he likes to find those chicken things, and he has a whole basement full of other paintings. Wow. He's like a gallery, like he could circulate them. So I always feel like, you kind of use your own curiosity. Like, what would I want to know about him? And I wanted to see where he lived. You will all be happy to know that John Lewis goes to Costco. Whenever we would come there, he would have he would say, "There's muffins for y'all," and I was like, "Mr. Lewis, don't go shopping for us." But he likes Costco. So
the film is John Lewis, Good Trouble. It's available on a virtual cinema near you now, and it's really important to say, and I say that I try to say this often when we do Q&As. It's so essential that for an independent film, for an independent documentary, even one that has some terrific backers. Word of mouth is vital to a film getting out. And this shouldn't be a hard film to talk about because it addresses people and topics and ideas and dreams of everything we're talking about right now in our daily lives, right? So that's a long way of saying tell a friend. Check it out.
Right. Go to www.johnlewisgoodtrouble.com. There you go.
Exactly. Tamar-kali, Erika Alexander, Dawn Porter, thank you for spending almost an hour with us. I appreciate your time today and talking with us about the film.
Thank you for having me. We do wish we were with you in New York, but this is great. Really appreciate it.
I'm okay on the homestead.
I bet you are.
I wish we were all with
you.
Next time I want to be your field holler. Woo!
I got you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Take care.
Take care. Bye.
Bye, ladies.
Bye, Dawn.